The New York Yankees are once again at the center of attention, and this time the conversation is heavily focused on the outfield situation, which has been a topic that fans have been debating for quite some time now. Over the past season and into this one, there has been a lot of discussion about roster decisions, player development, and whether certain players are getting the opportunities they deserve. What makes this situation even more interesting right now is that recent performances are starting to shift the conversation in a completely different direction. The expectations were very clear coming into the season, especially regarding some of the younger players in the organization. But the way things are currently unfolding is forcing the team to reconsider certain plans, and that could lead to some very interesting decisions in the near future. One of the biggest talking points right now revolves around the performance of the Yankees outfielders and how inconsistent things have been at the plate. The team has a group that, on paper, looks very strong and very capable of producing runs, especially considering what they were able to do offensively last season. However, baseball seasons are long, and performance can change quickly, especially early in the year when players are still trying to find their rhythm at the plate. Some hitters start hot, others start slow, and sometimes those early numbers can create pressure from fans who want immediate changes. That is exactly the situation the Yankees are dealing with right now, as some players are struggling to make consistent contact, and that always opens the door for conversations about potential call-ups and roster adjustments. This is where things start to get really interesting because the Yankees have several options in the minor leagues, and there's one name in particular that fans keep talking about. The excitement around young talent is always strong in New York, especially when a player shows power, athletic ability, and defensive potential. But at the same time, development is not always a straight line. A player can look amazing during one stretch and then struggle during another, and that does not necessarily mean they're not talented or that they will not succeed later on. It simply means that adjustments are part of the process, and sometimes those adjustments take time. Right now, the Yankees are watching closely to see how their young players respond to adversity, because that often tells you more about a player than when everything is going well. At the major league level, the Yankees are also dealing with the reality that some of their current players are not producing the way the team hoped they would at the start of the season. It is still early, and nobody is panicking yet, but fans are definitely paying attention to batting averages, on-base percentages, and overall offensive production. When a player is known for power but struggles to make contact, it can be frustrating to watch, especially if the strikeouts start to pile up. On the other hand, if that same player starts hitting home runs, the conversation changes very quickly. That is the nature of baseball, where performance can completely change the narrative in just a few games. Another important factor in this whole situation is roster flexibility and defensive positioning. The Yankees have players who can play multiple outfield positions, and that gives the team more options if they decide to make a change. Defensive ability is extremely important, especially in a big ballpark where outfielders need range and strong arms. If a player can provide solid defense and also contribute offensively, that is the ideal combination. But if the offense is not there, then the team has to start thinking about whether another player could provide more overall value, especially if that player is performing well in the minor leagues and proving that they deserve an opportunity. What makes this situation even more complicated is that some players who are currently in the minor leagues are actually performing very well offensively, and that naturally creates pressure on the major league roster. When a young player is hitting for average, hitting for power, stealing bases, and getting on base consistently, fans start asking questions about why that player is not already in the major leagues. The organization, however, has to think about development, playing time, confidence, and long-term planning, not just short-term excitement. Calling a player up too early can sometimes hurt development, but waiting too long can also be frustrating if the player is clearly ready for the next level. So the Yankees now find themselves in a very interesting position where performance at both the major league and minor league levels is forcing the organization to evaluate their options very carefully. They have veterans who have proven they can perform, but who may be struggling at the moment. They have young players with huge potential who are still developing and trying to become more consistent. And they have fans who want to see the best possible lineup on the field every single day. All of these factors together create a situation where every game, every at-bat, and every performance starts to matter a little bit more because it could influence future roster decisions and playing time as the season continues. As the situation continues to unfold, the spotlight naturally shifts toward the players who are knocking on the door of the major leagues, trying to prove that they are ready for that opportunity. Development in baseball is never just about raw talent. It is about adjustments, consistency, and the ability to respond when things are not going your way. And right now, one of the biggest concerns surrounding the Yankees system is how some of their most promising prospects are handling adversity at the plate. When a hitter starts to struggle with timing, it can quickly snowball into something bigger, especially when strikeouts begin to pile up. That is exactly the challenge being faced at the moment, and it is forcing the organization to take a more patient approach, even if the demand from the outside continues to grow louder. What stands out the most is the contrast between potential and production. There are players in the system who clearly have the tools to succeed at the highest level, showing flashes of power that can change a game with one swing. But at the same time, the inability to consistently make contact becomes impossible to ignore. When a hitter is putting the ball in play, good things tend to happen, especially for someone with elite strength and bat speed. However, if that contact is not there, the power becomes irrelevant, and the overall offensive value drops significantly. This is where the Yankees have to make a critical evaluation, because they cannot afford to bring a player up who is not ready to compete at the major league level, especially in a division where every game carries weight. While that internal evaluation continues, there is another storyline quietly building momentum, and it involves a player who is making a very strong case for himself with every single game. Performing well in the minor leagues does not always guarantee immediate promotion, but when the numbers are this impressive, it becomes harder to justify keeping that player away from the big league roster. Hitting for a high average, driving in runs, showing speed on the bases, and maintaining a strong on-base presence are all indicators of a player who is locked in offensively. And when you combine that with previous experience and natural athletic ability, it starts to look like a very real option for the Yankees if they decide that a change is necessary. The team also has to think about how these potential moves would impact the overall structure of the lineup and the defense. Flexibility becomes a key factor here, because having players who can adapt to different positions allows the Yankees to experiment with combinations that could maximize both offense and defense. If one player is more comfortable in center field, another could shift to a corner spot, and that adjustment alone could create a more balanced outfield. These are the types of decisions that are not always obvious from the outside, but internally they can have a huge impact on performance and team chemistry over the course of a long season. At the same time, it is important to keep everything in perspective. The season is still in its early stages, and baseball has always been a game of adjustments. Players who are struggling now could find their rhythm in the coming weeks, just as players who are performing well could face their own challenges later on. That constant fluctuation is part of what makes roster decisions so difficult, because acting too quickly can sometimes backfire. The Yankees understand that they need to balance urgency with patience, making sure that any decision they make is not just a reaction to a small sample size, but a move that makes sense for the long-term success of the team. Still, the pressure is building, and with each passing game, the conversation becomes more intense. Fans are watching closely, analyzing every swing, every at-bat, and every defensive play, trying to determine who deserves to be on the field. The organization is doing the same, but with a much deeper level of analysis, taking into account not just statistics, but also mechanics, approach, and overall development. That combination of internal evaluation and external pressure creates a fascinating dynamic, one where every performance feels like it carries extra weight. And as all of this continues to develop, the Yankees are approaching a point where a decision may no longer be avoidable. Whether it is sticking with the current group and trusting that they will turn things around, or making a bold move to bring in a player who is producing at a high level, the next steps will say a lot about the direction of the team. Because in a season where expectations are always high, especially in New York, standing still is rarely an option, and the choices made in moments like this can end up defining how the entire year unfolds from this point forward. And the more this situation develops, the more the internal competition within the organization becomes one of the most important storylines to follow. Competition is healthy for any team, especially one that expects to compete at the highest level, because when players know that their position is not guaranteed, the level of focus and intensity usually increases. Every at-bat starts to matter more, every defensive play becomes more important, and players understand that performance is what keeps them on the field. That environment can sometimes bring out the best in a team, because it pushes everyone to stay sharp throughout the entire season. Another factor that cannot be ignored is how momentum works in baseball. A player who is struggling today can suddenly find his swing and go on a hot streak that changes everything. We have seen this happen many times before, where a hitter starts the season cold. Fans begin to worry, and then within a couple of weeks, he is one of the hottest hitters on the team. That is why organizations try not to overreact too quickly, especially early in the season when the number of at-bats is still relatively small. Timing, confidence, and rhythm are huge parts of hitting, and once a player finds those again, the numbers can change very quickly. However, while patience is important, there's also the reality that teams competing for the top cannot afford to wait forever if production is not there. That is where the depth of the organization becomes extremely valuable. If you have players in the minor leagues who are performing and showing that they are ready, it gives the team options. Those options create internal pressure, but they also create opportunities for improvement at the major league level. Sometimes a simple roster move can bring new energy into the clubhouse, and that energy can translate into better performance on the field. The Yankees are clearly in a phase right now where evaluation is happening every single day. Coaches are watching swings, analyzing approaches at the plate, looking at how players handle different types of pitching, and trying to determine who gives the team the best chance to win not just today, but over the long course of the season. It is not just about talent, it is about consistency, discipline, and the ability to make adjustments when pitchers start to figure you out. The players who succeed at the highest level are usually the ones who can adapt the fastest. But before we continue, please remember to join our channel and give this video a like. Your support allows us to keep bringing you the latest news about the New York Yankees. Feel free to share your thoughts on the news in the comments. A cloud of uncertainty has begun to swirl around the CODY Bellinger camp, as quiet whispers grow louder within baseball circles. According to emerging speculation, the outfielder, currently linked with the New York Yankees, may be facing a far more serious situation than initially believed. Sources close to the organization suggest that Bellinger is dealing with a concussion that could sideline him for an extended and unexpected period. While no official confirmation has been issued, insiders hint at growing concern behind the scenes. The nature of head injuries in professional sports has always carried an element of unpredictability, and in this case, the recovery timeline being floated is raising eyebrows across the league. Some reports cautiously suggest that Bellinger might not return to action until 2027, a scenario that, if true, would represent a devastating blow both for the player and the franchise. The Yankees, known for their tight-lipped approach to player health matters, have remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the speculation. This silence has only fueled further debate among analysts and fans alike, many of whom are trying to piece together clues from recent roster decisions and subtle shifts in team strategy. Bellinger, a former MVP known for his athleticism and power at the plate, has battled adversity before, but a prolonged absence due to concussion-related issues would mark a significant chapter in his career. Around the league, there's a growing awareness of the long-term risks associated with head trauma, and teams are increasingly cautious when dealing with such injuries. For now, everything remains in the realm of rumor. Yet, the possibility of losing a player of Bellinger's caliber for such an extended stretch casts a long shadow, leaving the baseball world watching closely and waiting for clarity that, so far, has yet to come. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the New York Yankees, please subscribe to our channel and give us a like. We always appreciate your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.